Hello, welcome to the Sovereign Magazine show. We are a transformational experience where conscious conversations meet embodied wisdom. Each episode invites visionary healers, thought leaders, and change makers to share their journeys of awakening, offering listeners practical tools and soul-stirring insights to reclaim their inner authority. Today, we have Abby Teixeira back. We are talking all about the cycle breaker's sacred boundaries. Yes, or on the last episode, not yesterday, she talked about, are you a cycle breaker? And she really talked about her entire journey. Today, we're going to be talking about estrangement as a sacred grief, and that, loving people you can definitely not stay connected to. And that whole grief process is going to be different for all of us. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for those who don't know you? And if you missed episode one, definitely go back and watch it. It is worth having that foundational information.
Thank you, Nicole. I'm so excited to be back and touching on one of my favorite topics of discussion. As you mentioned, I'm Abby Teixeira. I'm located in Treaty 6 territory, also known as Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I'm a speaker, I'm a published writer, I'm an author, trauma recovery coach. I'm also a complex trauma survivor and a mother of four. So I help cycle breaking women, especially mothers, healers, coaches, creatives of the global majority, rise from survival mode and really start to learn to lead from their truth. And so my work really blends in identity shifting transformational coaching, ancestral wisdom, and feminine leadership to guide others in reclaiming their voice, their power, and their purpose. And so I everything I speak on is from lived experience and what I have initiated into. And I'm really grateful for this opportunity to speak on these topics because these are not conversations that are common. They're not common, right? And I know that we are not the only ones that are experiencing these things. And so that really is my mission to really voice and name some of these harms so that there's whoever's out there listening, if I could put words or name to their own experience that maybe they've been silently suffering through. That really is a big part of my mission is just to allow for others to be seen, even if it's just in a small portion of themselves in my own story, and really release that shame that is really surrounded with these kind of topics. So I'm really excited to dig in.
And I'm always excited to dig in with you because that's exactly what happened. We say that we're soul sisters from another womb.
Yeah.
And you finally gave me the words for my experience. And I never thought that others didn't experience what I have. I just didn't have the words to explain what I was feeling. And so I would really, really love for you to share a little bit more about what you wish people would understand about estrangement. And I don't want to say perhaps where they get it wrong, but perhaps what they don't understand about estrangement. And just for some baseline levels of my experience, I'm sure you're going to go into yours. My father has crossed over the rainbow, and both of my parents, they died within 12 days of each other, both my biological parents. And so my stepmother is the only one left, and I have chosen to estrange myself from her. So for anybody who was like, well, what is your story? That's my story. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about Abby and what she's gone through. So perhaps let's get some foundational feelings and words to what estrangement is and grief and all of that for those who are watching.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing a little bit of context on your own experience as well. I'm estranged from my dad, so my father, and it's been several years. And most recently, I'm actually estranged from a sister of mine, a sibling. And so, what I want to say is that estrangement is probably one of the most misunderstood experiences in our culture. I've heard it being framed as rebellion, as a trend, as selfishness, as canceling family, those kind of things. I've heard it being framed as. But for most people who choose it, it comes after, and I know this is speaking again from my own lived experience, it comes after years, sometimes decades of trying to make it work, trying to make the relationship work, right? And what I really want to like make clear is that no one estranges from someone they don't love, right? Like it just doesn't happen, right? Just like grief, where there is grief, there was once great love, right? And so for me, you can love someone deeply, you can grieve them deeply, and you can also still not be able to stay in a relationship with them, right? And that's really the paradox in the heart of sacred grief, right? And so it's really one of these things that there's been some talk lately, especially I don't know if you know, but like Oprah had some special on estrangement, and it really brought estrangement front and center in, kind of on social media, and there were so many opinions. I tried to like steer clear a little bit from some of those platforms and, kind of these messaging boards and all this kind of stuff, because there was just so much misunderstandings and misinformation being, thrown, because there's always two sides to a story. And,
Mhm.
oftentimes I know that the people I'm estranged from have their own very different narrative as to, why this happened and all of that kind of stuff, right? So it can get really heated, right? Because there's people that have totally different perspectives and the way of viewing things and, taking responsibility or not, all of that kind of stuff, right? But for me, the reason why I call it sacred grief is because you are still grieving somebody who's alive. And there's something so
Mhm.
complex about that, about grieving somebody who still walks the earth, right? You're grieving a relationship that maybe never was. You're grieving the hope that you carried for years. You're grieving the version of them that you needed. I know for me, I hoped and I prayed and I expected, for one day this person, to finally see me, one day this person to finally take accountability, this one day, to be validated in my experience. And when that didn't happen, it was devastating. It was devastating for me, right? And you're really truly grieving the future that you once imagined. And now you're seeing that that's not really going to happen, right? So it's not just loss, it's really loss and love and clarity, right? And so, and the other thing I'm going to say is that these kind of decisions, I know for me, this wasn't a decision that was made in anger. Like it wasn't like I got mad one day and I was like, I'm making this like, emotional decision. This was very carefully, thoughtfully, painfully decided upon, and it was made in exhaustion. When you get to the
Mhm.
point where you are just exhausted of trying and there is no other way out. And, I'd always talk about what people pleasing is, right? And for me, a reframe that was really eye-opening was the reframe that when we are people pleasing, we are in essence abandoning ourselves. It's self-abandonment. And so, how much did I need to abandon myself in order for me to keep up with this relationship? Was the question that I finally got to. And it was exhausting to have to mask, to have to dim my light, to have to tiptoe, eggshells, all of that kind of stuff, right? And it was just like, I can't keep doing this anymore, and so that's like for me, it was decades of trying and going nowhere, and so that's where that decision kind of came and stemmed for me personally.
Oh my gosh. There's so many thoughts. I started writing down words so I didn't forget. Number one, 100% agree. It was decades for me. And even while my father was alive, we would talk about gaslighting. And in his last few weeks, he said, please just keep the peace for me until I go. That was his wish, which I did honor. Unfortunately, I didn't know he was going to pass in 2 weeks. But
Mm.
I said she's toxic. I have therapists who are telling me she's toxic, and I like to use the word unhealed now because toxic I'm just not a fan of, but definitely unhealed. And so it was so many incremental shifts and setting up different boundaries that were good for me, and then they kept being crossed. And so then I'd have to set a new boundary, and then they kept being crossed. So I wanted to share that I
Mm.
mirror you and the decades worth of trying and also losing myself as well. But really, what I wanted to touch on, because I think that this show is going to be so transformational, because there will be one time for everybody, it'll be different when they'll just hear a word. And for me, what came through and was like this light bulb moment as you were speaking was how many times people told me I just had too high of expectations and that I
Mm,
needed to lower my expectations because she's never going to change. It's disrespectful for me to ask her to change at her age, which I 100% agreed. And that's when I took ownership saying, well, she doesn't have to change, but I certainly can. And so I wonder if you have ever been told like lines like that, like your expectations are too high, or like you're sitting on a
mhm.
pedestal, or any of those types of things, and how you worked through that in order to teach yourself to have that capacity for self-love.
Yeah, this brings me into something I wanted to touch on when we're talking on the topic of estrangement, because there is a lot of, like I said, misunderstandings. There's a lot of different perspectives. And what I like to call there's the myths and there's the reality. And, one of the myths that I constantly hear is that estrangement is impulsive, right? That we get upset one day and we just decide I'm cutting you off, I'm canceling you kind of thing, right? But like you said, the reality of that is actually it comes after repeated boundary violations, right? Like you have your own boundaries, and sometimes these boundaries are minimal, minuscule, and they still are
Mhm.
being violated, right? And broken promises, attempting
Yep.
at repair with no resolve. This comes after therapy, conversations, the forgiveness cycles. You hear, oh, just forgive and forget, and all these things. Maybe this time it'll change. All of those kind of
Mhm.
expectations that others kind of put on you. And then the other one, you didn't try hard enough. You just didn't try hard
Mhm.
enough, right? And the reality is that for most of us, we over functioned for years, and holding on to that myth, this is probably the most popular of them all, is that family over everything, right? And
Yes.
I subscribed
Oh,
to that for a very long time, but it's your family, but it's your so and
mhm.
so, but
Your
like
blood.
family is
Mhm.
everything, blood over everything, what that did for me was that it made me feel like there was something wrong with me for not like one day waking up and feeling like, yeah, but is it really family over everything when this person is causing consistent harm? When I can't be who I actually am in front of this person, that I have to
Mhm.
mask in order for me to belong, to be a part of. And so, family without safety is not, to me, is not family, right? Endurance
Mhm.
is not love. Tolerance is not healing, right? And so there comes a point where hope becomes self-harm. And that was my story, where I held on to this hope that it became harming to me. And I'm a mother. I have 4 kids. I'm married to the love of my life. And I saw how it directly impacted me in my own home, and this energy drain, this like constant thinking about it. And, and it was just, I had to finally, choose me. And in a world where we are taught to self-abandon constantly, choosing yourself to somebody else might seem like it's selfish, might seem like, oh my goodness, like, this person only cares about themselves, all that kind of stuff, right? And so, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it just when you were talking, I just thought about, the common misconceptions that people that I've personally heard, when it comes to this topic. And something that is very for me that I started to really recognize is that my body knew, my nervous system knew far before my mind did. You know, um,
Mhm.
the anxiety that I would feel before holidays,
Yep.
the tightness in my chest, the
Mhm.
exhaustion I felt after interactions, the
Mhm.
looping and the mental rehearsing that happened, the collapse again and again after trying. And so I started to really pay attention to these single signals that were always there. It's just that I bypassed them because family over everything. You got to try harder. Another one is like, that's just who they are. That's just who they are.
Mhm.
And so you just have to get used to, who they are. You got to meet them where they are. Right. And
Mhm.
my nervous system's clearly signaling like danger, this is not okay. The
Mhm.
anxiety, the depression, the energy suck, all of that kind of stuff, right? And it really got to the point where I just said, I can't do this anymore. I can't. It was affecting
Yeah.
my family that my now the family I'm creating, with my husband, my kids, for my family of origin. It was seeping into everything in my life, because it was really taking because I just so badly longed for things to be different. And here's the
Me
thing that
too.
I really wanted to really name, because sometimes shame can really come into play. We might feel some shame because of some of the decisions that we make and all of that kind of stuff. And we also might feel shame when the waves of grief come up. And I will share about a very real-time experience I had very recently. Uh, I saw this picture there. I was looking at these photographs, and there was a picture of me, this kind of candid picture that somebody had taken. And when I looked at it, I realized that I have my dad's smile. And I might even get emotional like talking about this because it's just very real time, right? And I was like, oh, like I have my dad's smile, and so do some of my kids, right? And it
Mhm.
was this wave that kind of hit me, where it was like it was a reminder of him, right? And that's what I'm talking about, the complex grief that comes with making the decision to estrange yourself from someone, is that
Mhm.
they're still very much alive. And it was like, and there was a part of me that really like missed him, like missed the illusion of the father figure. And I thought to myself, I was like, wow, like I have a smile, And it was like, and then the thought that followed afterwards for me was how I wish things were different. How I wish it didn't have to be this way. And
Yeah.
and then what followed after that was the wave of shame. It was like, what are you talking about? Like, look at all the things that happened and look at all the times you try all these kind of things, right? And almost like you should be over this already, like those kind of things that those programmings that we get from society that said like grief has a time frame, that you get a couple of days of bereavement leave when somebody passes, and then you come back to work and everything's back to normal. But it doesn't work that way. And what I did to counter it, because I have been, really living through this, what I did to counter it was that I gave myself permission to feel the sadness of this and to be okay with wishing that it was different and not shaming myself. I was like, it's okay to wish that things were different.
Yeah.
I truly do wish things were different, but they're not, right? And really naming that and presencing that. And then the shame dissipated. And instead, I met myself with so much love, tender compassion, so much acceptance, and allowed myself to feel it, feel the feels. And then, afterwards, it passed. The wave passed. I was able to ride through it, without having to shame and demean myself and all of that kind of stuff, right? And then giving myself permission that as the waves come, that sometimes there'll be anger, sometimes there'll be tenderness, sometimes there'll be sadness and confusion, all of those kind of things, right?
Yeah. I would
Mhm.
love to talk more from a selfish standpoint than anything, but I'm sure other people have had this experience about the family unit. And for me, it was my daughter who was like, I don't want to go see her anymore. Like she's not listening to me. She's crossing my boundaries. I mean, she's so like eye-opening to all of it. So she actually was the catalyst for me going, you're totally right. But for the people who perhaps have children and they love their grandparent, right? They maybe don't have that relationship that you do. I
Mhm.
was, I don't want to say lucky enough because that's not the right word, but I had a child who felt the same way as me. And I gave her permission to choose. I never decided anything for her. I gave her the opportunity to talk to her if she wanted to, or write letters or whatever, which she has done. But ultimately, once again, boundaries were crossed and then she cut her completely off. But how do you usually recommend, or what was your experience with your children? Because I would imagine that most often people are afraid of estrangement if they have children because of that grandparent-child relationship. So, what do you
Mhm.
normally do with that?
Yeah, yeah. So it's not everyone's experience is the same. And there are nuances, there are, different things to take into consideration. The way it stands right now, my dad is not a part of any of our lives, including, my siblings, my mom, so he's not in the picture. He was at one time, and my kids know of him. They've seen him, they've had interactions with him and things like that. And, this is a very real question to ask, and it's a very real question that I get asked, oftentimes because I do, I have four kids, 7 and under. Um, the way I handled it was when they started asking like, oh, well, where is he? When they suddenly did like, didn't see him anymore. I am of one of like, I firmly believe that I don't want to, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, like I'm not one to bash, my dad to my kids. They will never hear me bash him, and say, well, he's this and he's that and like all this stuff, but I will speak in fact and truth. And the way I handled it is that, when they asked, where is he and things, I'm like, to be honest, I don't know where he is. I don't know where he is, and he's a very sick person. He's not well. And I pray that, one day he'll be better, and I wish him well. That's all. And if they have more questions, like I've gone as far as saying, like unfortunately, he hurt mommy. He hurt mommy when I was a little girl, he hurt mommy and never made it right. And my kids are very familiar with the repair process because it is one that I
Mhm.
practice almost daily, you know. So they know that, when mommy hurts them, whether it's like, yelling or whatever is the dysregulation that happens, I am one that will own up to my actions and I will repair with them. There will never go a day, 24 hours without me acknowledging that there was a fracture in the relationship, right? And so they are very aware of what that process looks like. And when I explain to them that, actually abuelo, which is, grandpa in Spanish, never repaired, never tried to make it right. The wheels start kind of turning. And so I explain it to them in ways that they can understand at their age level. And I'm a firm
Mhm.
believer that as they grow up, they will come to their own understandings. They'll have their own lived experience, just like your daughter started to experience herself, started to experience what it was like to be in relationship with this woman, right? And or maybe being around her. And she made the decision that she wanted to have those boundaries. Similarly, I very much encourage that with my kids, where I really encourage them to um, experience things for themselves. And I'm an open book. They can come to me and ask me questions, and I will try to, guide them and talk to them about it and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm just not one to start going off and well, he's this and he's that, and I just lay out the simple facts and the truths of the relationship, in a way that they can hold and understand at their tender age, right? So yeah, that's been my
Yeah.
experience with that.
It is such a difficult topic. And like you said, there's so many nuanced ways and experiences and how it all presents. However, we all come back to this foundational part, which is actually going to be episode 3 for us. And that is that we're healing our inner child. We're having to reparent ourselves and we're
Mhm.
having to give ourselves the opportunity to grieve the childhood that we didn't get. And I think that when I started to look at it from that lens of, I didn't get the childhood that I desired for many different reasons, and I didn't get the parents that I desired or needed as a child. And that's okay. I can still thank them for the parents that they showed up and were willing and able to be. However, it wasn't good enough for me. And that's not necessarily a dig on them because they were probably doing the best that they could. But I can still say that I was unfulfilled, right? And so,
Mm.
in this next episode, we're going to be talking about healing your inner child while also parenting children of your own, which is so challenging, right? But it is also, and I'm sure you will agree, becoming a parent has elevated my growth exponentially. And I am such a different person. And I think that this next conversation we have is just going to be so incredibly yummy. So, for anyone who is watching, definitely like, share, subscribe, comment, all of those things so you can follow this series with us. We're going to be going on this year-long journey. And if you have any questions for Abby, she's in our community, community.sovereign-magazine.com. All her details are in the show notes on how to connect with her on socials. And she's just like the brightest star to our community. So definitely stick around and, be part of the conversation. Do you have any parting words before we go today?
The thing that's really coming to me right now, because this is what I hear from others who are, fellow survivors and who are making these difficult decisions. I want you to know that you're not too harsh, that you didn't not try enough, that you're not the problem, that like what if I regret this? What if they change and I've already left? And having those self-doubts doesn't mean that you're wrong. And then feeling the grief also doesn't mean that you're wrong, right? And missing them also doesn't mean that you're wrong. So these are all things that can exist at the same time, right? But it still doesn't mean that you have to go back, right? And so I felt really called to speak to that because sometimes I know I've battled with that myself internally. Like, am I being too harsh? Maybe I didn't try enough. All of these kind of things, right? And but I will tell you what estrangement did give me. It gave me clarity. It gave me nervous system stability. It gave me alignment between my values and my actions, safety for my children, sovereignty, integrity, a deeper connection to my chosen community, right? And I didn't cut these people out of my life to punish them. I cut contact so that I could stop the bleeding, because I was literally bleeding all over the people around me because of this deep wounding that I had, right? And so if I could really just speak to, self-compassion, and yeah, I'm really, really excited to continue this conversation because I think it's so important and it's a layered one for sure. Loving someone doesn't obligate you to stay in the harm, and choosing distance doesn't erase that love that once existed. And so that's what really I felt called to really speak to. So thank you.
Oh, such a good conversation. Thank you so much for being here, and I cannot wait for the next one.
Thank you.